Hi, everyone. Welcome to Adobe Live Pro Tips. My name is Cyn Lagos. I am a graphic designer, photographer, and aspiring filmmaker. So thank you for joining me. Today, I want to share with you one of my favorite tools in Adobe Lightroom. It's the Target Adjustment tool. So let's dive in and take a look. Okay, awesome. So once you open up Lightroom, head over to the right-hand side where you're going to find all of the adjustment properties. Okay. So in here, we're going to navigate to color. And in here, there's a couple of things, but go directly into the color mixer. So in the color mixer panel, we're going to find this little guy, and this is going to be our target adjustment color mixer. So you can click it here and you're going to get this panel right here. So the color adjustment tool, the target adjustment tool, deals with three different properties with the hue, the saturation, and the luminance. So those are very, very different, although they seem to deal with the same thing. So let's select hue here. I have three different images here to experiment with and one additional one if we have some time. So let's try the hue first. I'm going to jump into this image here is predominantly green. And I do have a few warm tones coming from the model, the skin tone. I want to make sure that those don't get damaged whenever I do any global adjustments. So the target adjustment tool is a really great tool in the case of, for example, if you don't know which of these levels corresponds to the color that you're targeting. So oftentimes for me, if I want to select this screen, I notice that it has a little bit of yellow in it. So it's a bit of a guesswork to try to figure that out. So instead of doing that, we pick up the target adjustment tool, and this is going to help us target specifically that color palette. So you can see there how that switches over. And I'm just going here on two extremes just to show you the differences. I'm going to undo that really quick and first target the color panel. I feel like the color on her skin is going to be more important first. So if I go to the left, it gets a little bit closer to those purple hues. And if I go to the right, it gets a little bit almost on the green hues. So I want to make sure that's a little bit rosy. So I'm going to leave it there. And let's target again that green. You can choose something a little bit on the blue side. It's a little bit delicate here because I am selecting a color on something that is very familiar to us, nature. We know that there are seasons. So this can actually make you or help you create different seasons in your photography. So it's really interesting. Sometimes I approach this in a creative way. So I don't really get too specific with seasons, but this way I get to select a color hue that I enjoy. So I'm going to leave it around here. I feel like this feels like a warm day and she's just soaking up the sun on a really chill golf day. All right, so let's go to our next photo. And in this case, we're going to pick saturation. We still have our target adjustment tool selected. We just switched over to the saturation property. Okay. Now I can select any section here. We have some really fun colors here. Some of my favorite ones, if you know my work. So blue and orange. So if I was to select the saturation on her orange outfit here, I can choose to go back and it desaturates that color. Kind of interesting, definitely creative. Not sure if you want to approach the skin color in that way, but just keep in mind that any red hues or any warm hues are going to be affected globally. So that applies to any color, but just keep that in mind for skin tones, right? Be very aware of your model's skin tone. So I'm going to be kind of a little cautious here on that end, but let's play around with the blue hue. So the blue saturation, I can choose. Oftentimes we always want to saturate more, right? That's what we always want. We want more color. All right, what would happen if I desaturate this? I think that's really interesting. It makes my model pop out of the frame, and it just looks really beautiful. It also acted globally. So the blue that was reflecting on the prop here what is actually removed also. So that's a really cool way to sort of clean out some of your elements if some color is leaking into other parts that you don't want. So I really like that. I think that looks really neat. Let's tap into the hue here too. Let's bring up that saturation just a little bit. And let me demonstrate what the hue would do to this image. So I want to bring it back a little bit here, and it creates this beautiful teal, a really cool combination with the orange hue palette. Let's play with the orange, make it a little bit warmer, and that already looks awesome. I am loving this color palette on this image. So let's move on to our next image. We'll come back to this one in a little bit. Okay, let's try the luminance property. Okay, so we have the luminance property and our target adjustment tool selected. In this case, it's a really cool photo. There's not a lot of pop colors here or predominant colors. So I'm going to use the luminance to maybe bring out some information that resides in my image. So this is a raw image. You can take raw images with your photos too. So remember that when you're bringing in photos in post-production. Pro tip. Okay, so let's select his shirt here. You can see it's mostly blending in with all of the white, but by selecting luminance, I can bring it down a little bit. And already I've brought out so much more information out of this image. And I feel like that's really interesting because it's a different approach to, rather than saturating a color to bring it out, you can just actually select certain sections and try to see if there's any information left on that image. I think that's a really interesting approach to your workflow. So try experimenting with that from time to time. Okay, so let's see what would happen if we select other elements of this image. So an interesting thing that happens here, we start bringing out more color, and as a result, we have even more contrast and more detail. It's a great way to improve some of your phone images, for example, that might not have that higher quality image. Let's bring out some other colors here. And again, this is a global edit, so you can see how it begins to affect his skin color. Also, this natively is just a lot of fun to kind of just play around with. I find it like a really interesting experimental part of Adobe Lightroom. And if you do have an iPad, I love spending hours just experimenting with the color mixer and using just my hand to be able to scroll through and try to adjust some of these panels. So let's go back to the saturation here and bring up a little bit of that saturation. You can see the before. Look at that after. It's nuts. It's so much information, and there's probably a lot of valuable information in your images. You just got to go look for it with the target adjustment tool. All right, let's go back to this image here and continue to test it. And this time I'm going to try the luminance effect on this image. So let's see what would happen if I target the luminance in the sky. We've done plenty already. We've done the hue and saturation on this image. It's one of the most colorful ones. So let's try seeing what happens when we attempt to target the luminance, or in other words, the lightness and darkness of the image. So I'm going to adjust here. And that kind of, think of it as adding white to your color palette, much like if you had a paint and you added white, you're going to get these beautiful pastels, right? Now, if we go to the opposite range, we get this added black hues, and that looks phenomenal. one of my favorite things to do is to select luminance to really bring out a different tonality of the color palettes. So you don't always live within the primary color palette, right? We know the primary color palettes look very similar to each other. And in this way, you start to create something that is a bit more unique within your photography. I think I like it around there. Yeah, that looks really nice. Let's see what happens if I use the luminance within her outfit. So interestingly enough, a lot of the reflections of the lights reflections here are coming out as well. So I'm going to try to target that luminance too, to try to see what happens. Great, that's a great way to bring out some of the light adjustments that you included while you were taking your photos. So if you have artificial lighting, this is also a great way to just manage how much light is within your photo. Let's go back to this one and see what would happen if we use luminance within these color palettes. And now we have a completely different green color palette. I'm kind of liking this more. Her skin is really just coming through. I think that one of my goals in my workflow is to often just bring out the subject matter that I want to be more prominent by either desaturating or bringing down the luminance of colors in the background. So that way we have your subject or my subject matter a bit more predominant, and it's the first in the hierarchy of things that your viewer sees. So I'm going to try to do that a little bit here on the whites, and you can see it also affects her outfit here. And you can see the before and after on this one. That's a completely different color palette. And also the lighting has changed too. So let's say we want to modify this one to change the color palette to something a little bit closer to blue. We can try that. And it's as easy as just scrolling to the opposite range, and you can see a brand new color edit within your image. It's a really interesting way to approach your photography. Also, if these have to go through client work, right? You want your client to see the different options that you can output. So you have these different approaches to the color palette that potentially may be part of their brand too. That's another thing to keep in mind. If you are not just doing this to experiment, but you also you actually have a gig that you want to match, this is a great way to kind of find that hue that matches their logo or their brand color palette. And it's just starts to, in very small ways, create that connection with the viewer. Let's jump onto this one and see what we could do if we use all three at the same time. Okay, so I have my color mixer. Again, in the color mixer, you'll notice something that happens whenever I adjust the hue, the saturation, or the luminance. That gets reflected here on our leveler, on our panel. So you can see here how that moves to the right or to the left, right? Really cool. So you can see those edits being reflected. And if you want to make a minor adjustment, I can change that 57 to maybe 54 and start to be a little bit more detailed on how much we want that adjustment to be added. Right, so they're connected. Let's change the saturation on this a little bit. From this to this, a little bit more demure. And let's see what happens if we use the luminance and some of these shadows and highlights. One of my favorite things is photographing in midday because you just get these really cool, sharp shadows and sharp highlights. It's an interesting illusion to play with luminance because it makes it feel like you're adding quality to your image, because creating that contrast makes that 2D image feel a little bit more alive. So you can do that by stepping into your light panel, or you can just do that by using the luminance within your target adjustment tool and making sure that those edits sort of reflect the focus that you're trying to attempt, right? A lot of my goals while editing photography is to make my subject pop. In this case, this is a pattern. So I took this, in fact, with my phone. So in this case, my goal is to increase the quality of this image, and not always in the most obvious ways. Like increasing the saturation could be a very easy go, right? But it doesn't look as natural. So you might want to do that in small increments, play with the hue, make things look a little bit more natural because it is nature. So there is that challenge. And then I love bringing images like this back to my phone, in fact, and using them as my background image just to inspire me or sort of refresh my phone interface so that I feel good and content whenever I use it. These are little things that you can do just to experiment with your photography. Even if you don't have a specific goal or you don't have a client gig, I feel like it's just really fun to experiment with your color palettes to find different ways that you can find a brand or sort of style that fits you, that's your style. It's kind of hard to find that style. It takes a lot of experimenting. So I do like just playing around here, giving myself different ideas of what I can do. And again, this lives here in the color mixer and everything gets affected. But one of the things that you'll notice once you begin to use this is that this is also part of your curve tool. So let's go here we have our color mixer, and we're going to go into light and go into our point curve. So point curve is something I'm going to touch on tomorrow a little bit more in depth, but this is still very much connected to the target adjustment tool, and it's a nice element that just kind of helps you find all the colors. And in the same way that it affected the color mixer, you can go in here and start adjusting different elements. And you can see the point curve also reflecting that change. So in this case, it looks like I am touching on my midpoint, right, of my highlights. So that is in fact what is being translated into my image and reflected on my graph. That's really helpful because having all these visual cues are going to just inform you on how much you're affecting a color over another, how much you're affecting highlights over shadows. And the target adjustment tool helps you sort of get rid of those nerves that you might have, or you might be intimidated by the point curve. I know I was. So using that target adjustment tool is a direct kind of touch and drag in order to make those shifts. This was kind of cool. We can add a little bit of red hue on what looks like is my shadows, right? A good way to learn that is wherever the point is. If it's a little bit lower, that's your shadows. This is your midtones, and this is your highlights, okay? And if I change my channel to something like green and start playing with that, it's going to find any small nuances of green within that image and start to adjust that. So it's not correcting an entire color. It's correcting any little bit of colors that leaked through. So if there's a bit of purple in there, it's going to target that specific color. If there's a little bit of green, it's going to target that. And we all know that that's how color, especially in an environmental shot, a shot that you took outside in ambient light, is going to have a lot of things reflected, and those colors can be something that you either want or want to take out. I know oftentimes I want to take out maybe some warm colors on the walls that I didn't want, so that the walls look nice and white. So let's see here a good example. We have this white wall here. I'm going to go into sort of the warmer channel and use the target adjustment tool to just see what colors are seeping through here. It's kind of a cool ambience to kind of start creating a little bit of that brown hue, or if you want to begin to neutralize any colors that are in there. I can affect the luminance by using this too, and you can see that being reflected in the point curve. It's very important to manage the skin color palettes. This one for me, in just the order of the images that we've edited today, I find it to be a level more difficult than, say, for example, this one. I would say this is beginners, this is medium, and this is difficult. And the reason why I say that is because whenever there is anything that around in the environment that is similar to the skin tone of your subject, you have to be very careful of how you manage the final output, because by lowering the color palette here on the wall, which is warm, I'm also affecting his skin, and I'm also affecting here his bottle and his watch. So it's really important to sort of be aware of the final output, and maybe have an image reference of the skin tone so that you can sort of make sure that that is reflected. Otherwise, there's also other ways. You can always use a mask to make sure that that edit isn't global on his skin and everything else, and those things can be separated. But just keep that in mind. This edit is in fact global, so anything else that reflects that color will also be shifted. I am going to correct this horizon because I've been looking at it, and crop it in just a little bit. Yeah, I like that better. I'm already happier. Okay, so let's see what happens if we target the blue hue on his shirt. Has a little bit of green, or we can go a little bit towards the blue side. Let's see what that looks like. I think I want the hue on the shirt to be a little bit different. So let's try that. So coming back to our color mixer tool here, let's select, we can select the blue directly in here and try to hope that that is part of my image. And you can see there that is a common mistake that can easily happen. I picked this blue, but in fact, nothing is happening. Is it likely this blue? Yeah, there you go. So that guesswork, I feel like, is one of the trickiest parts, and using the target adjustment tool just sort of skips that step altogether. And I can just jump in here, select hue, so that I can modify that color. Now I have a more teal cinematic sort of color palette. We all know that that quintessential cinematic orangey teal color palette. So bringing that in here already just kind of brings it into a more interesting set of colors as opposed to something that is just muted. And of course, this is up to you. It's your preference. There's options for anything that you may want, but that is something to keep in mind. So let's see here. Okay. So let's see here the final outputs of all the ones that we created. This is the before. This is the after. Before, well, this is before. This is the after using the color mixer. This is before, and this is the after on that one. Before and after. Nice. I feel like that alone on this third image, I didn't get to experiment with this before. We did this all live. So thank you for being part of that. This has been so awesome already. So a little recap. You're going to find a color mixer within your color, the target adjustment tool within your color mixer panel, but also within your point curve panel. So keep that in mind whenever you are experimenting. This has been already so much fun. Thank you for being part of this. And also thank you for joining me. So it'll be the same time tomorrow. So hopefully I'll see you there too. And I hope this was inspiring to experiment with your phone photos and your own photography, and enjoy the next stream.